Yep.
So this may be a cultural question, but is it a fair question to ask? If we, as we discover your business, we peel back the onion, if we find some way, find some things that we can do differently, would you be willing to execute those? And the reason why I ask that is too many times that in the past I've been involved in a solution, you buy it, it's great, 6 months later you go back, and I'm too many. Or you get the old, you don't understand, this is the way we do it. Well, why do you do it that way? Because we've always done it that way. And it's hard to get them to make that adaptation. As a matter of fact, I've actually got to the point where I said, if that's your answer, you've always done it that way, then you don't want it. Because you've already known.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's, but that's the culture. And, you know, you're not necessarily going in to change the culture, you're going in to fix the problem. So, sort of have to go in with eyes wide open. But that's, you know, that's good information. And then you can decide, well, is this something that I want to work on or not? I mean, how does the cost benefit equation sort of work out? But the other part of that is that, you know, and it's something that somewhere along the way you have to have the dialogue with the client, is that if you're going to go in and, you know, do some work with them, oftentimes, you know, you're not just solving a problem, but you're putting a new system in place so that that problem won't reoccur. And that requires change. It requires, you know, building new habits. And so somewhere along the way, and I wouldn't say too soon in the process. Again, that might be one of those points where you scare them off. But at some point, you know, asking questions about, well, you know, how is your, you know, team? How do they process change? How do they deal with change? How receptive would they be to whatever solutions, you know, you come up with? Those aren't necessarily the best questions, but I mean, you sort of have to get at that because that's going to affect your, you know, your effectiveness. But that's an excellent question. You know, just asking them, what have you tried? What have you done? That's, I mean, that is a perfect, yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, like I said, you're not selling a car, you know, you're selling an intangible. And the only way you can really sell that is to get them comfortable with the way you work. So essentially what you're doing, you know, I tell my candidates in job search that, you know, you're being evaluated every step along the way. You know, people don't necessarily process that, but you're being evaluated from the time that I contact you, whether it's via email or phone. You're being evaluated by the receptionist, you know, at the company that you might be interviewing for. You're being evaluated by everybody in the hall that you meet. You're being evaluated by the boss's secretary. It's not just the first time. If you're invited back, I mean, the process continues. So you have to be, you know, at the top of your game. But when you're, you know, selling consulting services, you're being evaluated just like you would be if you were a candidate for a job. And, you know, if you're, you know, sort of cutting right to the chase, well, this is the problem, this is the solution, you know, they're going to think, well, you know, it's the whole point of, well, the biggest problem I have with in the recruiting process is most people aren't trained to conduct an interview, especially senior executives. I mean, it's really unfortunate. So I can't tell you how many times I've come against a situation where a candidate goes in for an interview, and the interviewer does all the talking. You know, they're selling the company, they're talking about this, they're talking about that, and they only leave, you know, a couple minutes. Well, do you have any questions? and then the feedback that I get is, you know, from the candidate, well, you know, I don't know, I think it went okay, but I didn't need to ask many questions. And then the client would say, well, I didn't learn anything about him, you know, who else do you have that I can talk to? So I've come up with tools that I help my candidates with so that they can break through that, you know, and get control of the agenda. And even if the, you know, even if the interviewer is doing all the talking, at least he's talking about stuff that's on your resume or your key accomplishment sheet. Yeah, and that's sort of, you know, that's one of those questions that, you know, when's the right time to ask that question? because understanding, what you've tried is great when you're trying to close the deal. But it might not be so great if you want to get into that, before you've closed the deal. But it's a great question because, you'll always hear, well, we tried that, it didn't work here. But, they probably didn't have the right system. It wasn't the right time. There's so many variables that could affect that, would ensure that it didn't work. But, now maybe there's a different situation. Okay, so this is sort of, going back to my unsuccessful opening, but which turned out to be a successful close. Don't ask questions that are important to you. Ask questions that are important to the prospect. It's like I said, I was dying and they were looking at me and I thought, geez. But as soon as I got into asking questions that resonated with them, that they wanted to get on the table, I wouldn't have been there if they didn't have a need and they needed help and they wanted somebody to come in and solve their problems, but they just needed to, get it all out there. And I needed to help them process it. So again, using executive search and executive search, by the way, is, it's all about consulting if you're doing it correctly in every way. But obviously I, want to validate the client's profile for the candidate. So oftentimes, there's a mismatch between, where they are in their life cycle, what their need is, in fact, even though they'll describe it one way, it might be, kind of off. But I got to validate that and make sure that we're on the same page. The thing about placements is that companies have life cycles. And at every different stage of the life cycle, it takes a different personality to manage that life cycle stage. And very few people, operate well in different stages. Some people are great at startups, but when it gets into, regular management, not so much. Some people are great at rapid growth. Other people, more steady state. Some people, are great at, that long tail, just keeping the business going as long as possible. Some people are great at turnarounds in Chapter 11, but it's a personality thing that, is sort of matches up with the stage. So you need to make sure that the client understands that, and you're going after the candidate that fits that stage. And of course, the ideal history and the other thing that's really clear to me is that what does success look like to the client or to the, again, you're hiring or you're working on an intangible, whether it's hiring a person or completing some kind of a consulting assignment. What does success look like to them? What is the end state that they're trying to get at? And the sooner you can get them to define that up front, the better you're going to be, and the better off they're going to be also. I know it can't be so profound. I'm not getting any questions. No pushback. So I guess about the final point is, as I said earlier, that you're being evaluated every step of the way. Your closing process is, your style of work. Let me say that differently. The client is looking at your closing process and saying, this is what I can expect when this person comes to work with me on this problem or issue. So if you've got a different closing style than operating style, then that's going to be a problem. Especially if your closing style is not as good as your operating style, you're going to be losing a lot of, opportunities. And if your operating style is not as good as your closing style, then you're not going to get referrals. So there needs to be congruence there. But that's the key point that people don't often recognize, is that you're demonstrating what it's like to work with that client as you're in the process of closing that deal. And with that, I got nothing. Thank you. So any questions, comments, concerns, on or off topic? Yeah, the only thought that sort of came to me a little bit late was about the whole mirroring concept. When you're sitting with somebody and trying to mirror their personality, and so what if the client is really intense, sort of in your face, not in an unfriendly way, it's just sort of say a New York style, you know, can you adapt to that? And because I think that's probably kind of important, you know, if you're dealing with somebody that's got that kind of, um, intense personality, and they see you as, Harvey Milktoast kind of a person, you know. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, that's one I've just, sort of recently was cogitating on. Consider the presumptive close. So as you're working through it, put yourself in the mindset of, I've got the deal. And the way I do that on the executive search side is, as I'm asking all these questions, it sort of comes from a form that I use. So it's largely scripted, but it's also flexible so that I can go in depth on issues that they might tee up. But it's as simple as, well, gee, do you have a job description? Now, most people internally really poo-poo job descriptions, and I get it. I understand why. But on the other hand, I need something I can sell to a prospective candidate. They like to know a little bit about the company. They got to know, at the end of the day, how am I going to be evaluated? What's my bonus based on, specifically? And so they need those documents. For a large number of searches that I do, like it's a new position or something, they don't have a job description. So I'll say, well, no problem. Let me send you a draft, and then you can edit it to your point. So, I mean, it's a little thing, but it's got them, oh, Jim's responsive here, I tell him that my job is to make your job easier, and he's proving it, by helping me with that little task. And so to the extent that you can, get them thinking that you're already working together, little tricks or the trade, techniques like that can be really helpful. But it's from my perspective, it's, again, the presumptive close. Assume you've got the close. Assume that you're going to be doing work with them. How do you start working with them? How do you demonstrate that? By the end of the conversation, it's like, okay, well, send me an invoice and let's get started, kind of a thing.